Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Friday night, Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks wrap up their spring game. And Dill, I think the biggest story coming out was that this night was won on the defensive side of the football. And look, I get it. I'm a fan too. I'm about to watch Michigan spring game this afternoon. There's nothing better as a fan than going out in a spring game and watching your offense rip it up. I think if you were to ask a lot of the South Carolina fans that follow this program pretty damn closely, and what I mean by that is not just tuning in for the games on Saturday, reading the spring practice notes, following what's going on the recruiting trail. If you were to ask those fans, what unit would you rather see play better football Friday night during the spring game? I think a lot of them would have said the defensive side of the football. I look at the South Carolina offense, and I get it wasn't great last night. There's a quiet confidence, I think, amongst a lot of South Carolina fans that this offense is going to be pretty dang good, especially when you have a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers. I think when it comes down to this South Carolina team, look, we know it's going to be good. How good are they going to be? Are they going to be an 8-win team or a 10-plus win team that makes the college football playoffs? I think a lot of it has to do with how good this defense can be going into 2025. To hear that the defense was creating a lot of negative plays, forcing turnovers, yeah, I think that can be taken as a positive for a lot of South Carolina fans coming out of the spring game. Now, I got to face the music, stand in the paint a little bit, Dill. I've been running my mouth all off season long about the South Carolina offensive line. Obviously was not great last night. We're going to talk a little bit deeper into it. I will say this, you had some guys sitting out of the game. You had a lot of mixing and matching on the offensive line. But we do have to talk about the offensive line struggles in terms of struggling to run the football, struggling to keep our quarterbacks clean. That's where we're going to start. We're going to kind of work our way through some players that really stood out and they'll kind of, put a stamp on, hey, I'm going to be a difference maker for this team in 2025. Before we get into it, as always, to the South Carolina fans, appreciate you guys. And I think many of y'all know this has been a team that has been really fun for the boys to talk about the last couple of months, and the amount of support y'all have shown has been amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, without further ado, I will kick it off to you. Let's start with the offensive line. It's been, look, I've been saying all spring, like everybody's going to talk about LaNorris Sellers in terms of why to believe in this team, and that's true. I'm a believer in the offensive line. Struggled Friday night. Overall takeaways about the offensive line heading into fall camp here.
Yeah, and obviously when you're down your two tackles, Josiah
Yeah.
Thompson and Casey Henry not playing, that's not super conducive to being really good offensive line unit. And then the fact that you kind of said it, I feel like this spring has been a lot of South Carolina trying to figure out who their best five are, what positions they're going to play.
Yeah.
Again, you have your two tackles, and Casey Henry really hasn't been around, it feels like, for most of the spring. You've been trying to figure out everyone else where they're going to slot in. And I think that you'd like to hear that get tightened up. That's probably the one thing I think by the start of fall, you'd probably like to hear, okay, Boaz Stanley is going to be our center. Tree Babwede or Nick Sharp is going to be our left guard. And you'd probably like to just hear more definitiveness probably going in the fall, because that probably mitigate a lot of these issues because the talent.
And I think you'll get that. I think you'll get that. I think in spring, when we're months removed from the season kicking off, this is the time to experiment and figure out where guys might be sliding in. But you're right. As you get into fall camp, now you got to start letting these guys work together as a unit and become as good of a unit possible. I'm still going to take the approach. Now, did the spring game last night maybe knock my confidence down a little bit on the offensive line? Maybe. But I'll still say this still. I see enough good players. In previous seasons for South Carolina, when their offensive lines have struggled, they just didn't have guys. It's just like we know we don't have good enough players to have a great offensive line. I truly think you're at that point for South Carolina. You've done a great job recruiting this position. You've supplemented it really nice in the portal. It sounds like Boaz Stanley, Dill, is a legitimate dude at the center position. I think they'll figure it out, but it certainly left a little bit to be desired last night in the spring game. And Dill, that might tell you, anytime you're having to try to block a guy like Dylan Stewart and you're down some starting tackles, it ain't going to be great. Let's talk about the quarterback room. Look, I don't think there's a ton of talk about LaNorris Sellers. What I would stress here is, look, this is not the environment LaNorris Sellers is going to thrive. They're not going to let him play a lot of backyard football. They're not going to let him do what he's elite at, and that is being a playmaker and creating on his own. Like that's what made him so good in 2024. That's going to be a large part of why he's so good in 2025. To hear LaNorris Sellers being, I think the term was pedestrian, that doesn't bother me that much. The big storyline coming out is Cutter Woods as a freshman. And Dill, I know it's like we care more about the 2025 season than down the road, but I'm saying this. It sounds like you got a dog in Cutter Woods, who was a late flip for my Wake Forest Demon Deacons. And you got a ton of talent, the young wide receiver room. I love the future of this quarterback room. So you know you got LaNorris Sellers for at least a couple more years, maybe 1 year, ideally a couple more years. But Dill, the young quarterback room, I think, should fire up a lot of South Carolina fans.
And Cutter Woods especially, because it did sound like he came in and gave him like that spark and like that like gamer to him. That like again, you just need that at the quarterback spot.
Yeah.
I think if you're gonna go win at a high level, yeah, it's nice to have quarterbacks who don't make mistakes, all those kind of things you hear, but you got to be a difference maker at times. You need to, when big moments hit, you need to be able to perform. And again, that's where if South Carolina is going to get to where they want to get to, I think right now you feel like you have that with LaNorris Sellers. It felt like in that Clemson game when they had big moments and he needed to make some things happen. And it wasn't always pretty for LaNorris Sellers, obviously last year, but when it was, when it was time to game up and make it happen, he always kind of did it for that team. So again, it'd be nice to hear that you have another guy who in Cutter Woods who like, yeah, it wasn't going well for the offense. Just come in with a little bit of moxie
and you've been hearing that all spring from this kid. Like he's been a name that we've consistently talked about. There's a really good chance he's a quarterback too in 2020. And that's not a bad thing. Like Cutter Woods started quarterback 4, quarterback 5 on this team, and has kind of put himself as I'm one of the best quarterbacks in this room going into 2025. Freshman wide receivers are going to play. Kind of a quiet night from Nick Harbor-Dill, Brian Rowe, Malik Clark. I think we're getting our answer to why Shane Beamer didn't go out and grab a wide receiver in the winter portal window. And what stands out to me is it's different from just flashing. We hear a bunch of guys like early enrollee freshmen, they'll come out early in spring and make a few plays and catch some eyeballs. It's a whole nother thing to consistently throughout all of spring continue to put it together. And then when you got a stadium that's full of fans, the lights are bright, probably the biggest environment on a football field that you have been in to your point in your career, and you're Brian Rowe and you still go out and ball out and stand out as a difference maker in this offense, this kid's going to be nearly impossible to keep off the field in the 2025 year. And you can say that for a couple other freshman wide receivers, but it sounds like Brian Rowe is probably got the inside track from this freshman group.
Just because you hear every practice, every scrimmage, it's like he's been really steady. And you said it like, yeah, you can make a couple highlight plays, maybe get your name in the practice notes or media observations, all those things. But like Brian Rowe, it's just like every game, every scrimmage, every practice, you kind of hear his name as just being like a solid, steady playmaker for this team. So you're probably right. He is the one who it sounds like if they're going to use one of them pretty consistently, it sounds like it's going to be Brian Rowe.
And I'll continue to say Donovan Murph would have been my pick, and he's not in yet. He's coming in the summer. Watch out for him too. I think he's a gamer. Defensive side of the football, interior defensive line continues to be a question mark, right? I think that's a position that South Carolina's got to grab at least one body going into the 2025 year. Now, Monkel Goodwin has seemingly had a really good back half of spring and played well last night. I think you feel good about Gabriel Brown-Lundendy. I think you feel solid about a guy like Xavier Hardy. I think you're looking for a difference maker to step up, but I think you're looking for some more depth to emerge at this position too, Dill. If there's one, because, when we were going into spring, it was like linebackers and defensive line. Now I think it's only the interior defensive line and maybe one more edge. We'll see what names hit the portal over the next couple of days that would present South Carolina the opportunity. This is really the last question that I have to see answered for the South Carolina team.
You've said it. Like, I mean, linebacker, something like if Jaron Willis is going to be a guy, I think you feel really good about where you could be there. And then even Desmond Ewan, Jatius Gear, like guys who we haven't really seen make it happen in college yet. I mean, you've seen some good moments from Desmond Yu. He's got the size. He kind of looks the part.
He's
Again, needs like smooth his game out a little bit and just like have a little bit more tools in the bag. It feels like as a
yeah.
pass rusher, but like a guy who physically kind of has it, and they've done a really good job with defensive ends. I mean, South Carolina's been developing that at about as good of a clip as anyone, it feels like, for the last couple of years. So I can feel good about those two spots, but you said it, like, again, right now, you almost feel like you have three guys that you kind of know what you're going to, or really two. Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwin are the only two who I've seen play college football and kind of have a sense of what they are down in and down out. Brownlow Dindy, I think he answered that question in the spring, so you do
Agreed.
feel good. But aside from that, like Xavier and Hardy, I kind of heard a note that he wasn't like really popping yet or really being
And
steady.
look, do I expect Xavier and Hardy to go out and pop? No, I don't think that was the expectation for anybody. It's like, but can you play solid football? Like my biggest concern for South Carolina is like when you're getting into the fourth quarter or when you're playing late in November and you have to access a little bit more of your depth. Are we good enough at that position? Are we deep enough on the defensive line? And I think that's still a massive question. Look, you answer that question, and it fundamentally changes how I view the South Carolina team. And it's kind of the last question that has to get answered. Thank you for shouting out the edge, because that's a position that it was kind of coming a little bit of a concern. You know, with Wendell Gregory transferring out of the program, Desmond Yu sounds like he's going to be a contributor. JT Greer going to be a contributor. I feel better about that position,
In
especially bringing
Jamon
in.
Clowney, I'm a little like torn on what to expect from him because I thought in 24 he didn't play particularly good, and then I went back to 23 and thought he looked
Yeah,
quite good. So like I do wonder, like again, can they squeeze that out of him? Like they like again, and you talk about hitting on older portal guys like South Carolina, they've done a
yes.
really good job with that type of player who like again, Kyle Kennard wasn't that guy until like South Carolina wrung something out of him that definitely never showed up at Georgia Tech. Like you liked him at Georgia Tech. You were like, oh, this is a solid football player for
Yep.
sure. He was not a star at Georgia Tech. He was not what he became at South Carolina. So you do Damon Clowney is kind of the one I'm now looking at. Like, because again, I watched the 24 some of the games. Like,
Still, the thing with Damon Clowney is like I don't need him to come in and be Kyle Kennard. Like we
but I
just
love
need.
it.
Yeah, but I don't think that's gonna. I don't think that's gonna happen. But we need 15 quality snaps from you a game, and I think you can get that from him. Again, for me, it's like whenever you have a guy like Dylan Stewart, you ain't gonna have that many problems rushing the passer. Are we deep enough? And it goes back to a conversation we always have going into a year. Go look at the teams that compete for national championships. They don't only have good defensive lines, they have deep defensive lines. That's where South Carolina has to get to. Now, that's either going to be, hey, we got to get some guys that turn it up going into 2025, or we got to go get a few more players. We'll see where we go. We kind of talked about it, linebacker room. Dill, I feel way better about this position than I did going into
Yeah,
spring.
with Jaron Willis sounding like he's a player, that changes things a little bit because he was a
Yeah.
fun one. Like, yeah, you saw the athletic him and Fred Johnson, like both like athletic profiles are almost like to a T what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But again, you still got to be able to be physical, take on blocks, and play smart football. Like again, we'll probably still not totally have our answer till the beginning of the year once you see them like get on the field. But like it does sound like they're developing the way you'd want, and you're not going to be totally relying on like a Justin O or a Donovan Darden or something like that.
Kendall Daniels, true freshman safety. Uh, the secondary is going to be good. Yeah, I don't have that many question marks about if the secondary is going to be good or not. It's probably the best unit on this defense so far. But we are a little concerned about the safety position. I think Kendall Daniels will play for South Carolina, which I think is really big. Outside of that, I think you're leaving spring practice with one question mark. Are we deep enough on the defensive line? If you can answer that question going into 2025, like I'm really confident in this football team. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. We'll ideally have some commitments to break down in the spring transfer portal window, specifically on that defensive line. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.